Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Molo, and we continue with this discussion where we're talking about the regulation, if necessary, of the religious sector. This is, of course, coming out of the acquittal of Timothy Omotosho, of course, then prompting the CRL Rights Commission to set up a peer review committee that will investigate abuses within the religious space. We're asking, should religion be regulated? Joining us is the Christian of South Africa's president, Apostle Derek Muswana, joining us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got also the author of Power and Faith, How Evangelical Churches Are Quietly Shaping Our Democracy. Bonso Pilani is also with us. And then we have the Moral Regeneration Movement's COO, Mr. Seth Mazibuko, joining us as well, taking your calls on 0105946010. Guys, thank you so much for being part of this discussion. It trickles down to every space in our country and in the makeup of our society, so incredibly important. I think that, Apostle, I do want to start with you because one of the things that the Christians of South Africa has done, and it would be interesting just for you to start us off with what the Christians of South Africa is, what the body does. But upon the acquittal of Timothy Omotosho, you released a statement that says, the Christians of South Africa welcome and celebrate the release of Reverend Timothy Omotosho, who has been unjustly imprisoned since 2017. Then you go on to say, throughout this challenging period, we have remained steadfast in our prayers and unwavering in our belief that justice will ultimately prevail. So talk to us about why it was important to release the statement when there seemed to be so much uproar around his acquittal, Apostle.
Thank you very much, and good evening to the listeners. Christians of South Africa is a prayer movement. Other than it being registered as a political party with the IEC, we have started off as a prayer movement that has got the sole responsibility of ensuring that Christians across the globe are united. So the reason why we issued out that statement is because since 2019, when the case was brought to our attention, we have been in support of the man of God, Reverend Tim Omotosho, by making sure that our national leadership is always present in his court appearances and ensuring that we bring to light the truth behind this case, because the uproar that is there is unconstitutional, undemocratic, and unprincipled, because in the Constitution of South Africa, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. So there is no way in which we can afford a situation where we are led by emotions and social media are buzzed, and therefore find someone guilty without resonates from the courts of law. So Reverend Tim Omotosho was appointed by a court of law on all the 134 initial charges. So whether they were downscaled because of lack of witnesses or credibility in terms of the statements, the initial charge that led him to prison were 134. And he was acquitted of all those charges. So we felt the responsibility to celebrate such acquittal.
I want to stay with you a little bit. Just allow me here, Apostle, because in the acquittal, you had the judge talking about how the NPA could have done a better job of, taking this issue, certainly even in the cross-examination of the accused. And that is why you have the CRL Rights Commission, the Center for Gender Equality, and the Human Rights Commission taking the matter forward. So when you hear society saying this is the direction that we're going to go, what comes to mind? So perhaps the question is, a Cheryl Zondi, an alleged victim, what is your thoughts on some of the abuses that they say they suffered at the hands of Omotosho?
We have said to the NPA, I think in 2019, we once led a march to the NPA and the Justice Office while we were still at the former Chief Justice. We went there to say, but we have analyzed the statements. They are far from the truth. These very witnesses that have been crying to be accepted back into the ministry, some of them on the first appearances of the men of God were holding placards to say the man of God is innocent, and later on they changed to say, no, I'm also a victim. We said there's too much that needs to be unearthed on this case, and therefore our feeling then and our feeling now is the case was politically orchestrated in order to favor the CRL's narratives that the church must be regulated, because out of many people, hundreds of young people that are being sexually violated daily in South Africa, the CRL was benchmarking all their resources to this particular case because they've got vested interest. They knew very well that if this verdict can go their way, they will have a leg to stand on the regulations of the church. That is why when the man of God was appearing, we went to the NPA. We took it upon ourselves to go to the NPA to say, these are Hawks charges, therefore drop them all, because even the NPA itself cannot find relevance in terms of cross-examination and whatsoever. So they could not cross-examine the accused because there was nothing to cross-question them on.
Let's step away from the Omotosho matter, because now we want to broaden it and talk about the sector as a whole, and we'll bring you in as well, Apostle, because certainly as a body, your opinion important. Let's bring in Mr. Seth Mazibuko. He's the COO of the Moral Regeneration Movement. When the CRL Rights Commission says we're setting up a peer review committee to look at abuses within the religious sector, Apostle, it says they have a narrative in the Omotosho case. What are your first thoughts? Do you see, as MRM, a moral crisis, a moral discussion in our country?
Thank you very much, my sister, and thanks for inviting us. Let me start here. I think I don't even want us to focus only on Omotoso's case, but I just want us, as we are taking a stand here, we are not a church, but we are looking at unethical behaviors, what our chairperson, Father Smangasa Mkata, calls social pathologies. And then we're looking at this seriously and say, where is the church? We find out that most of the time, the church is in court instead of being in the church. And we come out also with this, that the church, if not in court, is in politics instead of being in the pulpit. The church gets entangled in most of these, so much what Mandela would have called unethical behaviors. It was, the church is the place where everybody, when hurt or being harmed, will run to. But we discover that the church has since become a place where you've got to be careful when you get there for help and support. Not only issues related to sexual abuse, but also the church has become very materialistic. That is just our basic findings. But what we are saying as Moral Regeneration Movement is that the church, as one would say in Sesotho or in isiZulu, let us really and feel what I've never heard, for instance, of an imam or of what is the Jewish one, or of you have an imam of a rabbi that make people eat grass, or that make people drink petrol, or that has been done so many things. Why does this have to be in the Christian faith? The Christian faith, the leadership there, and what we are saying is that in the process of being approached to also participate in this process, what we are saying is that how many people have died coming from South Africa, going to other places, I'm not going to mention some phrases that came in and said, God will do this and that for you. And most of them, we have said, no, don't tell us. And let's look at even the places, some of them where they worship. No health aspects, no health conditions, no simple things as, you go,
okay, Mr.
if there's
Mazibuko,
fire, what will happen?
Yeah.
And we are asked.
Yeah, apologies, your line giving us some trouble, and we're going to come back to you because there is so much to talk about in so many voices. 0105946010. Bonto Pilani is also with us. You authored the book Power in Faith, How Evangelical Churches, and you say, are quietly shaping our democracy. I mean, what a way to put a title on that book. And this is from your own personal experiences. So as you hear the work that will be done by this Section 22 peer review committee, your own personal experiences say, what do they need to get right and why?
Thank you so much, Naledi. And I think what is so important about considering this peer review is, what will it achieve? Consistently, we've seen the CRL really fail to proactively deal with issues that have to do with exploitation or an abuse of belief systems by various religious groups. And even if you look at the formation of the CRL, which started in 2004 as a Chapter 9 institution, there's been a lot of failures, whether it was mismanagement of funds, governance, and other issues that have really creeped up when you look at the records, their parliamentary submissions of whether it's their budgets or annual plans. So we need to ask ourselves, also within the context that in 2017, they conducted that research into the commercial exploitation of churches and how whether or not those recommendations and the findings that they got from that really long process in 2017 have been implemented in any other way. And then ask ourselves if it is a vehicle that can really bring us justice, particularly for survivors and victims of exploitation and sexual violation in the church. And in my book, I really trace the history, some of the history of the CRL to show how, it does not have teeth. We already know even outside of the CRL, sometimes the difficulties Chapter 9 institutions have with implementing some of their recommendations and holding those that have it has seen as guilty or the cause of problems accountable. And this is the same thing. So the question is, what is going to be different with this peer review process that is different from the report that came out a couple of years ago that was initiated in 2017? And how are we going to see justice for survivors come up, particularly because churches and religious institutions as a whole have been left to their own devices without any regulation. And it's not necessarily that regulation should happen, but in the absence of that, then what are we saying to society about accountability and ethical accountability when morality is such a big issue that the church or religious institutions have taken on?
Yeah, so many opinions are coming in on this one, and of course we're welcoming them. We're not done with the conversation though with our panelists. We certainly will continue it on the other side of this short break. 0711055584 to send us a WhatsApp. We're going to take a look at some of those WhatsApps, of course, after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about, of course, what is happening within the religious sector in the country. You've got, for instance, the Section 22 peer review committee that has been set up as announced by the CRL Rights Commission that is going to, over the next 18 months, be looking into whether or not we have religious institutions where human rights violations are taking place, where the dignity of their congregants is being compromised. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what would the regulation of the sector look like? And do you see the success of this committee? 072-110-5584 is the number to send us a WhatsApp. Take perhaps one or two calls on 010-594-6010. Let's see some of the WhatsApps that have come in, though. Lipiane Togozani says, the churches must pay tax now, and pastors must produce a theology degree or diploma from higher education. Females are the most targeted people in church and are being abused by so-called fake pastors. Example, the case of Omotosho, Nigerian pastor. Mr. Togozani, thank you so much, or Miss, thank you so much for that. VM Panto says, good evening. The CRL seeks to regulate religious institutions. However, what will the approach be towards African indigenous spiritual institutions? Because the two simply cannot be painted with one blanket approach. As in the past, we saw that the work of the Commission was not balanced in terms of consultations, and therefore their efforts to regulate the religious sector failed dismally. Viewer, interesting points. Thanks for that. Muhle Buyeza says it's a bit of a catch-22 situation on this issue of regulation. One of my biggest concerns is maybe the existing peer review committee as to whether there's equal representation in it of both charismatic and your traditional members to ensure proper findings and oversight. Yeah, interesting one on representation. Temba from Ivory Park says, good evening, lady. The regulation of churches is long overdue. They must be registered and pay tax. When the pastor is able to pay bodyguards, then they can be able to pay SARS. All right. Taking calls as well, 010-594-6010. Where did the time go? Apostle, I want to come to you. You know, what you make of this discussion around the regulation of churches and if it's something that needs to be done. I don't know if you were able to hear Mr. Seth Mazibuga of the Moral Regeneration Movement speaking about some of the concerning characteristics of a religious institution that is in an ethical peril, saying they're outside of the courts instead of the church, they're entangled in politics. You mentioned that you were outside the court supporting Omotosho, and you mentioned that you also double as a political party. So what do you make of those statements made by Mr. Mazibuga, and also the discussion on regulation? I think your mic is off, Apostle.
Yes, what I was saying is the church on its own is the salt of the earth. So we need to be everywhere and everywhere. We cannot limit ourselves because we are not the salt of the buildings or the salt of the congregation, but the salt of the earth. That is the commission that we have been given into Scripture. So the church must be actively participating in every sector of the society so that they can give guidance, they can manifest the Christ and give accurate directions and lead by example. So on the regulation, unfortunately, we as Christians of South Africa, we have said it before and we will continue to say it, that the church cannot be regulated. I mean, if most people have got this unfounded anger against the church. One caller now, one listener was also calling for pastors to have degrees, but they are not calling the same on Sangomas and every spiritual practitioner that we have in the country. So there is that anger against the church. I don't know if it's media influenced or what, but people tend to just fight the church for unnecessary reasons. I mean, why do you have to question if I've got bodyguards and how do I afford them? If I can afford them, then why don't I have them? Because it's not everyone that can afford bodyguards. It's not everyone that needs bodyguards. If I'm a multi-millionaire, I will definitely need bodyguards. But if I'm a thousandaire, I won't need bodyguards because I won't even afford those things. So regulation on its own or the established committee, we reject it as Christians of South Africa. One, because it has got the risk of bias, where personal beliefs or affiliations will be will go in conflict with objective assessments. We also say there's a representation gaps. Remember, we have got over 17,000 pastors or religious practitioners in the Christian fraternity within South Africa. So given the diversity of South African cultural religious groups, not everyone will be represented in that particular peer review committee. And there is also its limited authority. I mean, it has got no enforceable legal powers. It has got no binding recommendations. So why establish a Section 1022 committee that will not have the functionality to address the current challenges that we have of the ministers? Fourthly, it has got a potential of conflict of interest, because these pastors that wants to serve into a peer review committee, they don't speak with each other. You find that they don't even they've never visited the next door neighbor church, but now they want to sit in a committee that regulate or review pastors. We'll have favoritism, we'll have protectionism, or we have retaliation from their behavior as reviewers or peer review committee members. We'll also have resistance and contestation, because this process will undermine the autonomy of the church, where divisions will have more divisions than accountability within the religious sectors. So we are saying churches should rather be forced to register and comply as Section 21 companies or as NPOs. Most of the ministries that are affiliated to the Christians of South Africa are registered, and they are complying in terms of their tax practices and requirements with the South African Revenue Council.
All right, thank you so much for that. Let's take some calls. Anonymous is calling in from Pretoria. Anonymous, good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you so much for calling. Talk to us.
I just would like to say, in terms of the religious communities, in specifically talking Christian, because that's where my experience is based in South Africa and Africa as a whole, the community sector of the Christian community is a pyramid scheme that no one is aware of, and it's not regulated to the point where you could view how Christian leaders in these different communities, in these different churches, are running a pyramid scheme where they're telling communities, give your money to the church because the church will help. Looking around, you don't see churches actually impacting their communities in a positive way, but you see the pastors driving very fancy cars. You see the pastors getting salaries that are not tax deductible because they take it through the NPOs. Nothing that they buy or own is owned by them, it's owned by their actual churches. Again, not taxed because it's coming through an NPO. The businesses that are run through the churches are also not taxed. So the coffee shops, the bookstores, when they go on travels and all of those things, nothing is taxed. All of the money that the congregation gives to these churches is given to these pastors. The pastors hire their children that have, again, no actual degrees. The degrees are taken through the churches. So the church says, we'll start a education, we'll start a university. Yeah. The children get their education through that. They say they've got a diploma. The children get paid salaries that are exorbitant. Over at 200K, again, not taxed. Again, so my point is these churches in South Africa, specifically because I live here, but in Africa as a whole, they're not taxed, they're not regulated, and it should really be checked because it's a pyramid scheme.
Anonymous, strong points that were made then. Bonto, I'm running out of time, so I want to get your closing thoughts. Anonymous brings up the issue of money, and it seems to be coming up quite a bit. But what do we take from this discussion? What do we need to get right as we close it off?
I think it's important for us to know that exploitation is happening, and they are actually dangerous religious institutions, particularly religious, because South Africa is so proliferated with Christian organizations and Christian churches, that there is a problem in the Christian church, and that it is not unfounded how people are, the comments that you've gotten already, that they do not exist in a vacuum. It is because of what has happened. And we need a CRL that is not just reactionary, that is driven by media scandals rather than sustained interventions, that even when we think about what interventions must be done, these need to be proactive, and we need a religious community that does not just focus on how churches and pastors or ministers can benefit, because we need to make sure that as much as freedom of religion is important, the responsibility that comes with being able to practice your religion and the ethical accountability that is required are also something very important. But we can't keep turning a blind eye to the very blatant exploitation of people, their humanity, their dignity, and the ways in which people are being victimized and violated simply because of religion.
I'm out of time, Mr. Mazibuko. I need to squeeze you into 30 seconds here. Apologies. But Bonso says ethical accountability, the moral regeneration's recommendation of what now?
Simple. Ethical code for all our churches and those who are leading it. If you call that regulations, fine, but ethical code. And what worries us is that this, call me racist, call MRM, moral regeneration, racist. It happens to the poor, to the blacks. It happens to us, not to any of your biggest. Omotoso, the case is black. You know, the priest in Northwest, who raped children and women and raped boys, is black. Please, ethical code for all those in this practice of the church.
Yeah. Our panel, thank you so much for your time. Such an insightful and I think eye-opening discussion. Certainly, Mr. Seth Mazibuko there is the COO of the Moral Regeneration Movement. Thanks as well to Apostle Derek Moswana, who is the leader president of the Christians of South Africa. Bonso Pilani is the author of the book Power and Faith, How Evangelical Churches Are Quietly Shaping Our Democracy. Perhaps you'd start thinking about what the ethical code of our religious institutions needs to look like for your own family, for your own community as we wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much. We take a short break. More news on the other side.